There is a deeply human mistake that almost everyone who has loved a narcissist has made a beautiful but dangerous belief: that if we are good enough, patient enough, compassionate enough, our love will awaken the real human hidden deep inside them. That behind the cold mask still beats a trembling heart, still lives a soul that's simply afraid. We believe that if we stay, if we love a little more, the light within us will redeem the darkness within them. But that illusion is what drains us to exhaustion. Because a narcissist does not understand kindness on the same frequency that you do. When you offer kindness to a healthy soul, they receive it as an invitation to connect a handshake between two free beings. But when you offer that same kindness to someone who survives on power and illusion, they don't hear love, they hear opportunity. In their eyes, your patience is not love. It's a weakness to be exploited. Your forgiveness is not noble. It's a signal that you will endure one more time. On a deeper level, this is where your persona, the good person, the savior, celebrated by society, begins to be devoured by their shadow. Their darkness seeks refuge in your light. Jung once said, "No one can step into the light without first facing their own darkness." And in this relationship, that darkness does not belong solely to them. It lives within your belief that you can save another soul by sacrificing your own. You once thought that if you just loved enough, they would change. That if you were softer, more patient, if you avoided reacting or hurting them, they would finally see and respond with decency. But that is a tragic misunderstanding. For a narcissist does not see kindness as a gift, they see it as a weapon they can turn against you. In their psychological map, emotions are not a language. They are instruments of control. They do not love with the heart. They negotiate with power. They do not empathize. They measure control. When you stay silent to keep the peace, they don't see calm, they see surrender. When you forgive, they don't feel gratitude, they sense your fear of losing them. When you choose understanding over anger, they don't perceive love, they see an open door. And that cycle endure, hope, forgive, becomes the oxygen they breathe. They don't survive on air, they survive on your emotional reactions. Yet ironically, narcissists are not evil in the religious sense. They were not born to destroy, but to escape. On the unconscious level, they are fractured souls, children frozen in time, carrying an unbearable original shame. They do not know who they are without someone else's reflection. Jung called this the identification with the persona, when one loses connection to the self and lives entirely through the mask they believe the world demands to see. They do not love, they need to be seen. They do not seek connection, they seek a stage. And on that stage, every relationship, promise, and emotion serves one purpose only: to maintain the illusion of omnipotence. Outwardly, they appear sharp, confident, powerful, but inside, they are a black hole of the soul, where every drop of feeling gets swallowed. Their emptiness is so vast that every attempt to be loved is only an effort to fill that void. Since childhood, they learned that to survive, they must bury their weakness and construct a false, self-perfect, unbreakable, needing no one. They dare not live with their own darkness, so they project it onto others, especially those with light, empathy, and open hearts. And that's how you become the mirror that holds their shadow. Thus, when you approach with kindness, they don't feel safe, they feel threatened. Your light exposes the wound they've buried all their lives. When you look at them with understanding, their unconscious hears, "I see you." But in their world, being seen means being exposed, diminished, and losing power. So they destroy the very hand that reaches for them. Not because you did wrong, but because your gentleness awakens their deepest terror, the fear of worthlessness. On an even deeper level, your kindness triggers in them a feeling of dependency, and dependency for the narcissistic ego is psychological death. They only feel alive when they are above, when others fear, admire, or chase them. In their nervous system, kindness is not coded as connection, but as a threat to power. The softer you are, the more you activate their primal survival response, attack before being exposed. They will distort your kindness into a game, turn your love into proof of weakness, and twist your understanding into chains, and soon you who came to love find yourself drained. That is why every genuine gesture of yours, an apology, an empathetic act, even a well-meaning silence gets weaponized into a power play. They cannot receive pure love, because to do so they would need an ego strong enough to admit imperfection. And for them, imperfection equals worthlessness. In the fractured landscape of the narcissistic psyche, admitting fault feels like annihilation. Carl Jung once wrote, "He who cannot bear his own darkness will turn the world into his mirror to avoid facing it." That is exactly what they are, souls trapped in a labyrinth of reflections. They never truly see you. They only see the echo of their own fear projected onto your face. That is why being nice cannot change them, because you are speaking the language of the heart, while they only hear the language of fear. In their nervous system, love is not coded as connection, but as a threat to control. Every act of tenderness reads as a promise that you will stay, that they still hold the power to define your worth. The more you love, the more you reinforce their illusion that they remain the center of your universe. In truth, the only thing that can shake a narcissistic psyche is not love, but the loss of control. When they can no longer manipulate your emotions, reactions, or presence, they are forced to face what they fear most, their own emptiness. When you step out of the game, their entire illusion begins to collapse because it was never self-sustaining. It only lived by feeding on your reflected light. On the philosophical level, this is the manifestation of the principle of enantiodromia that Jung spoke of. When an extreme is pushed to its limit, it reverses into its opposite. The narcissistic ego, once cut off from external sources of energy, collapses under the weight of its own inflation. And if they ever change, it is not because they have touched love, but because they have lost power. They are not enlightened by light, but driven into their own darkness, where there is no one left to mirror them. Jung once said, "Whatever you reject within yourself will return from outside to make you look at it." The narcissist is the mirror of that very darkness, the part of you that still believes goodness can redeem everything, that love can heal even the shadow. But kindness cannot save anyone if it isn't illuminated by awareness. Beneath the belief, "I can make them change," lies a deeper fear. The fear of losing love, of being seen as cruel, of feeling worthless if you stop loving. And the narcissist, with the instinct of an emotional hunter, smells that fear. They read your energy the way a predator reads the heartbeat of its prey. They test you with a harmless joke, a small boundary violation, a disdainful look. And every time you let it slide, you teach them that you will let it slide again. While you think you are protecting love, you are in fact training them to manipulate you more skillfully. Kindness, when not guided by consciousness, turns into moralized tolerance. You call it compassion, they call it permission. You say you believe in the good in them, they know you're believing in an illusion. You think you are healing, in truth you are being drained. The more you try to keep this love alive, the more you feed what kills it, manipulation. And in that theater, you are the only one fighting, while they stand back smiling, feeding off every emotional reaction you offer. You believe that if you just love enough, stay positive, send light, their darkness will dissolve. But that is not love. It is denial, dressed in spiritual language. Jung called this spiritual bypassing, when people use the idea of light to avoid facing real darkness. The reality is, not every soul seeks healing. Some have chosen the path of power, illusion, and manipulation. To them, your light is not hope, it's a threat, because it exposes the corners they've spent a lifetime hiding. When you try to save a narcissist, you are not truly helping them. You are distorting your own energetic axis. You are sending an inverted signal to the universe that says, "I am willing to lose myself to maintain a dead connection." And the universe, in its infinite compassion, lets you learn this lesson through your own pain until you finally understand true love never asks you to disappear so that another may exist. The narcissist knows exactly how to tune emotional frequencies to bind you. When you start to doubt, they throw in a tender gesture. When you grow weary, they cry, confess, and soften you again. This is a form of emotional oscillation control, withdrawing energy, then injecting illusions of affection. And you, caught in that vortex, become trapped in an emotional addiction known as trauma bonding, pain, hope, soothing, re-injury. Each cycle pulls them deeper into your energy field, like a spiritual cord tightening around your soul. You think you are loving, but in truth, you are being possessed. Because in this drama, your light no longer illuminates. It becomes fuel for the darkness you're trying to save. Seen symbolically, the relationship between you and the narcissist is not merely between two people in love, but between two souls bound by an invisible energetic thread where the current flows only one way. You give light, they absorb it and return diluted darkness wrapped in charm. You give compassion, they return possession. You offer trust, they convert it into power. The closer you get, the more blurred the boundary becomes between you and them. You begin to wonder, whose emotions are these? Is this anger truly mine, or is it the echo of someone else's shadow wearing my face? Inside your mind, conflicting voices arise, one part wanting to leave, another feeling guilt, fear, and the haunting belief that walking away means betraying love. That is the sign of psychic possession, not a bodily takeover, but an infiltration of your field of consciousness, where the line between compassion and fear grows dim. The astonishing truth is that cord cannot be cut with anger, only unraveled through awareness. Because anger is still a reaction, and reaction is the very energy they feed on. Only when you begin to observe without reacting, when you can look at the fear and say, "This fear is not mine. This guilt does not belong to me. This voice does not come from my soul," only then does the energy start to reverse. All manipulation and control in the energetic universe depend on unconscious consent to exist. Once you withdraw that consent, the parasitic structure collapses. No battle, no hatred, no need to prove. You simply close the energetic gate. No reaction, no rescue, no over-understanding. And in doing so, you perform a sacred act of the soul, the ritual of returning the shadows that never belonged to you. Jung once said, "No one can possess your soul if you know you are being possessed." Awareness is the weapon. When you become conscious, you cut the parasitic circuit. And then, the narcissist, deprived of emotional supply, deprived of reflection, falls into what they fear most, the void of non-reflection. They begin to panic because their darkness no longer has a host. And so, they will try one last time. They will beg, as if truly remorseful. They will blame, as if you caused their loss of control. Or they will play the victim to reignite your empathy. But if, at that moment, you are awake, you will see the entire performance with serene clarity. You no longer hate them, because you see through them the terrified child within, the distorted survival mechanism, the emptiness masked by a proud persona. And in that gaze, you reclaim your power completely. Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you only want to see the good hidden within them, without daring to face the darkness manipulating you, you are not seeing light, you are denying shadow. And in the world of the narcissist, denial of darkness is how you empower it. Kindness, without the illumination of awareness, becomes an empty ritual of spirituality. The more you try to hold loving energy, the more clearly they sense your fear of disconnection. The more you try to understand them, the more certain they become that you will not leave. And thus, from within your own gentleness, they build the throne of their ego. Every time you yield to keep the peace, a fragment of your soul is taken piece by piece until you no longer know where compassion ends and moralized submission begins. This is the dark side of empathy, when a heart that longs to save becomes the open door through which darkness enters. Yet the paradox of awakening is this. At the darkest point, true light begins to emerge. Because only when you realize that goodness is not light unless it stands with boundaries, Do you begin the journey of individuation, the process of disentangling from illusion and returning to the sovereign wholeness of your own soul? Here's the English translation. The beautiful paradox is this: only when you stop trying to heal others, does the light within you gain real power. It is no longer the light of naivety, but the light of wisdom, a light that can look straight into the darkness, touch it, and not be swallowed by it. That's why being nice is never the path to peace. Being conscious is, and when you step out of blind kindness into awakened awareness, their game begins to collapse. But don't be mistaken, narcissists are not merely lost in the dark. They are parasites of emotional energy, living off the light of the souls they latch onto. They do not generate light, they copy it, siphon it, distort it, then project back a counterfeit version to deceive both you and themselves. For them, emotional energy is not connection, it is survival fuel. They inhale attention like an addict, not because they love you, but because your presence makes them feel real. When you smile, they feel powerful. When you hurt, they feel alive. When you forgive, they know you are still bound to their cycle. They live like light-absorbing mirrors, unable to shine on their own, sustained by reflecting the light of others. This is the mechanism of psychic parasitism, what Carl Jung alluded to in his idea of possession by the shadow. They don't just manipulate your behavior, they slip into your inner space where thought, feeling, memory, belief, and intuition are commandeered. They make you doubt your instincts, bend your memories, and wonder whether you are too sensitive, crazy, or paranoid. In doing so, they plant a psychological parasite in you, an invisible entity that feeds on your reactive energy. The more you react, the stronger it grows. The more you explain, the deeper it embeds. A narcissist doesn't want you to leave, but they won't let you be free either. They haul you up with promises, then push you down with silence. They pour guilt into you whenever you try to stand up, making you believe self-protection is selfish and boundaries are cruel. And because you are compassionate, you lower your guard, you return, you understand them again. In that very moment, the parasitic cord is reattached. Imagine a creature that lives in darkness and cannot absorb light on its own, so it clings to stars to survive. The brighter the light, the more it's enthralled, yet the more it resents the source, because light reveals its darkness. That is the narcissist. They cannot bear purity, yet they cannot live without it. So they seek to muddy everything they touch, ensuring no one can reflect the truth of them anymore. When you are confused, doubtful, and exhausted, they feel safe your inner chaos becomes the veil that hides their inner emptiness. To them, your kindness is not something to cherish. It is the road that leads them straight into the center of your energy. They use the language of emotion to manipulate reason, guilt to bind compassion, and love to swallow the soul. Once inside, they don't only want your heart, they want to shape your entire being in their image. They want to turn you into a mirror for their emptiness, a person weary, hollow, and perpetually self-doubting, just as they were once broken. And if you don't see this, if you keep trying to understand one more time, you gradually lose the ability to feel yourself. They will make you believe that understanding is love, when in reality your life force is being drained. The narcissist does not want healing. They want to pull you into the frequency where they exist, where dependency is called love, suffering is called attachment, and light is devoured by darkness. But when you begin to see this mechanism, not just understand it intellectually, but pierce it with awareness, you recognize a profound truth. They want not only attention, they want possession of the soul. And when you realize this, you understand that kindness must be protected by boundaries, otherwise your light becomes fuel for the darkness they carry. What truly shakes their system is not love or logic, but boundaries lived. Not boundaries spoken, but boundaries that have become your energy. When you keep silent, not from fear, but from having nothing to prove. When you leave not from anger, but because you have seen the essence. When you no longer react, no longer try to understand them, but simply observe in quiet awareness. That is when their entire power structure collapses. Carl Jung called this the turning point of the shadow. When the energy once used for fear is transmuted into lucid awareness, the shadow loses power. You don't need to fight only to look directly. You don't need to shout only to stop explaining. And in that stillness, you reclaim the territory of your soul. For what the narcissist fears most is not your anger, but your understanding. Understanding breaks the spell. Understanding pulls the plug on the game. Understanding is light cutting through the veil of illusion. They may call your silence cold, say you have changed, that you are insensitive, too rational. But in the language of awakened souls, this is not indifference, it is the transparency of awareness. You begin to see them as they are, a consciousness trapped in the loop of dominance and submission, light and shadow. And when you no longer participate, the game ends not with victory, but with the natural dissolution of illusion. What truly makes a narcissist change, if ever, is never kindness, but the loss of control. When manipulation fails, and your reactions vanish into stillness, they are forced to face the inner void they have fled all their lives. Even then, their awakening, if it happens, is not your mission. You are not here to save anyone from their darkness. You are here to learn how to keep your light without being pulled into it. Understand this deeply. You do not teach a narcissist with words, you teach them with absence. The absence of reaction, of guilt, of the need to explain. That absence is the quiet declaration that you have returned to self-sovereignty. When that happens, every power play turns to dust. Sometimes justice does not arrive as punishment, but as a shift in frequency. When you are no longer vibrating at the level of that pain, it cannot touch you. You are no longer defined by them. And at that level of awareness, kindness is no longer a wound, it becomes wisdom. When you are still enough not to react, bright enough to see through the mask, a new door opens not toward them, but inward, because the real question was never, why are they like this? But, why did I stay so long? This is the turn into your own darkness, what Jung called the descent into the unconscious. A journey downward, not to drown, but to recover the soul, fragments you forgot. You realize, no one can manipulate you unless you unconsciously permit it. The narcissist can touch only those places in you that still believe love must be earned, that endurance is the price of being seen, that saving others proves your worth. These sacred wounds, the childhood gaps covered over with self-sacrifice, are the gateways through which darkness enters. When you see them not with judgment, but with honest clarity, you begin to unbind them layer by layer. Inner work is not learning to become stronger, but learning to sit with your own weakness without banishing it. It is the dialogue with the inner child who once believed, if I am good enough, kind enough, patient enough, love will stay. And now, you look at that child through the eyes of an awakened adult and whisper, you don't have to endure anymore. True love doesn't come from sacrifice, but from being honest with yourself. This is the step of individuation, the return to the self, the true center of the soul. After all the breakdowns and the panic, after the pain that has purified your spirit down to the bone, there comes a moment of quiet, not fanfare, not lightning. Just a morning when you open your eyes and realize you no longer tremble at the thought of them. Not because you've forgotten, but because you have absorbed that darkness into your own light, the way the earth absorbs ash after fire. That is when the inner alchemy completes its circle. The death of illusion makes way for the rebirth of truth. Jung called this stage rubedo, the moment when the soul unites light and shadow into wholeness, when you no longer fear wounds because you understand they are the gateways to awareness. You begin to see darkness not as the enemy, but as the teacher. You realize that darkness no longer has the power to consume the light, because the light has remembered who it is. Healing is no longer a mission, but the natural state of a soul that has come home to its center. You no longer seek peace, you become peace. You no longer run from darkness, you walk through it. And in that passage, your light stops shining outward to be seen and begins to radiate inward to be known. Once, the power belonged to the narcissist, for they controlled your reactions. Now power resides in your stillness. You are no longer manipulated by guilt. because you understand guilt is just a tool. You are no longer ruled by compassion, because you can now tell the difference between empathy and complicity. You no longer seek closure from the one who hurt you, because you've completed the circle within your own awareness. And the paradox is this: when you no longer need them to change, that energy destabilizes them. When you no longer need to be understood, they lose their stage. When you no longer need to be loved, they lose their power. True strength was never about winning, it was about no longer being controlled. You have reclaimed the sovereignty of your soul, a place where no one can grant you worth and no one can take it away. You are no longer light against darkness, but light that embraces darkness without losing itself. That is the deepest meaning of individuation, the soul's return to its center, where all polarities dissolve. Good and evil, light and shadow, right and wrong, everything reduced to pure awareness. Now, when you smile, it's not because you hope someone will notice, but because you are whole. When you love, it's not to be loved back, but as a natural overflow of a soul that is already full. When you are silent, it's not avoidance, it's the sacred language of a liberated spirit. You realize that true justice isn't about them paying the price, but about you no longer vibrating at the frequency of that pain. You no longer need anyone to confirm that you were right, because you've stopped playing a game that needs a winner. You no longer seek vindication, because peace has become your proof. You no longer need to prove love, because true love has never needed proof. In ancient alchemy, when lead is transmuted into gold, no new substance is created, only the essence trapped within the crude form is released. Likewise, your journey doesn't turn you into someone else. It frees the true essence that darkness once imprisoned. You realize that the wounds that once broke you are now the places where light enters. The betrayals that once shattered you are now lessons in discernment, the ability to tell real energy from false. The loneliness that once frightened you is now the temple where you commune with your own soul. Jung once said, "The one who looks into the darkness will become a torch for the world." Your light now is no longer the fragile light of someone begging to be seen, but the calm glow of one who has walked through hell and kept their heart intact. It does not seek anyone to illuminate. It simply is, and in its being, it lights the path for other souls lost in the same labyrinth. You return to the world, but not as before. Everything around you looks the same, but your presence has changed. You no longer walk in fear, but in clarity. You no longer try to be good, you simply are true. You no longer need to prove your light, for you know that light does not need affirmation, it only needs awareness. And in that awareness, you become the alchemist of your own soul, the one who has learned to turn pain into wisdom, separation into rebirth, shadow into the gold of consciousness. You understand now that being nice won't change a narcissist, but consciousness will. For when awareness awakens, the light within you is no longer a door for others to enter and take. It becomes a torch that guides other souls seeking to escape the same darkness. You no longer hate them, nor do you need them. You simply stand in your own stillness like a star that no longer fears the night, knowing that it is the darkness itself that makes its light shine.